Welcome back, everyone, to the Pentland. Delighted we have an expert panel here today. And I would like to say a huge thank you to the sponsors of this session. We have Bernice Paul, SSE, and Martin Curry. And without further ado, I will just hand over now to Aileen Shrimpton, who's the chair of this session. Aileen.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today. Today, what we're going to do is all the partners here, we all are working in neuroinclusion at various different stages of our development. So my name is Aileen Shrimpton. I work for Mindroom. I'm the programme manager of the Neuroinclusion at Work programme and also training provision. But I'm going to let the panellists introduce themselves, and if I start with you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Aileen. I'm Andy Lewin. I'm a project director at SSE Renewables, and I'm a dyslexic, and that's why I'm on today's panel to talk to you about my experience of work. I'm also a recovering engineer. I tend to mostly do leadership roles these days, but do every now and then drift back into being a technical bod.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosie McRae. I'm the Head of Inclusion and Diversity at SSE. And great to be joined by Andy, who did an excellent session last year for Neurodiversity Week, where you talked about your own situation and your experiences with dyslexia, which was excellent, but good to be here.
Okay. And Jen?
Hi everyone, I'm Jen Mayer. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Martin Curry, and I'm also Head of Diversity and Inclusion. And I've been with Martin Curry for 7 years, and we're starting our journey with Stelvis and Mindroom just around now to increase our learning and understanding of neurodiversity.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Smith, and I'm the Inclusion and Wellbeing Manager at Bernice Paul. We're a Scottish headquartered commercial law firm, and I have been working with Aileen and Stelvis and Mindroom Centre now for probably about a year. So we're quite early on in our journey, but similarly just looking at how we can be a more neuro-inclusive employer.
Hi, I'm Claire McPherson. I'm a partner at Bernice Paul, specialising in tax planning and trusts. And I found out about 3 years ago that I'm autistic, so that's why I'm included in the panel today.
Okay. So to start off with our first question, I'm going to come to you, Rosie. I'd like to know, why your organisation chose to sort of put neuroinclusion on the agenda.
So for us, during the pandemic, we had a kind of rising from employees who came forward and said we need more communication, a support network for ourselves. And part of that was a community, which we called the suite of communities belonging at SSE, and one was for chronic health, disability and neurodiversity. So we have been listening to the voice of that community for a while, have an action plan in place. But more than that, all the work we do is very data-driven, and we know that of all the employees that have volunteered their data about disability, and the majority of them are saying they have a neurodivergence, and that's either diagnosed or self-diagnosed. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason we said we need to raise some awareness on this. It's 25% of those that have volunteered their data have shared that. So we definitely felt a need that we needed to raise awareness about things that people might not be familiar with.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps coming to you, Jen, why did you, at Martin Curry, why did you decide to put neurodiversity on the agenda?
So, similarly to Rosie, there's growing awareness within our business of neurodiversity, whether people are discovering themselves later in life with a diagnosis, or maybe they've got a family member who's had a diagnosis. But also more broadly, as others have said throughout today, many employers are sort of intellectual capital driven. They're thinking organisation. They're focused on diversity, the power of diversity of thought, and the different elements of intellectual productivity that we can all bring, the differences that we all have. And we're very aware of that within investment management. Investment management is a business where we thrive on diversity of thought and unique perspectives. And we're very aware that neurodiversity can bring some very unique perspectives. And it goes against the whole thing of groupthink. We want individual opinions who are prepared to challenge and stand up for points of view that maybe others haven't seen. So we're very intrigued and keen to explore and understand the people who we have in our organisation, and also to attract great talent to Martin Curry, so that we know that we're harnessing the power of diversity and unique perspectives, which is really what our clients who are looking for us to invest are wanting us to do. So it's really that aspect too for us.
Yeah, thank you. And Emma, the same question to you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, similar to both Jen and Rosie have said, I mean, the pandemic really for us kind of let us get to know our employees a lot more, and let us realise how individual everyone is within the organisation, and you know, particularly how everybody works differently, and how they're effective doing that. So I guess that coupled with, I mean, similarly, we sort of started various communities during lockdown. Our Be Valued network, neurodiversity was one of the things that they've kind of wanted to raise awareness of, and it just really fitted in with, I guess, that sort of new person-centred approach that we were taking to our employees through the pandemic. Similarly, we have seen kind of quite an increase, particularly within our graduate programmes, of young people disclosing neurodivergent conditions prior to sort of coming through our assessments. So it's something as a business we really want to learn more about in terms of how we can support young people coming through those processes, and support employees, existing employees we have, either who have a diagnosis or perhaps don't have a diagnosis yet, but certainly have challenges within the workplace where they could benefit from support from us. So yeah, really raising awareness and learning ourselves is what's prompted it.
Yeah, thank you. And Rosie, if I can come back to you, can you kind of walk us through the process about how you started off opening up the conversation about neuroinclusion at work?
Yeah, so I think just by listening, so the communities they came from the employees, they were employee-led, and very early on there was this sense of it's not just support for us as a community, you know, we definitely want to help you identify what needs done. So we called that quite early on the employee voice part, and that's a big pillar, one of the 4 pillars of our inclusion strategy. So it's quite governed now. You know, we have an approach, we have listening circles, we ask, we then have the grace to review and say, okay, what are the things we're going to put in action? Our MDs are sponsors for that community. They meet every 2 months to say, how are we tracking? Is there anything holding yourself up? So, for example, the finance director is the MD for sponsor for this community. And one of the suggestions was a read and write tool, a piece of tech, and he also looks after tech. So he was saying, you know, any problems, let us know. And we're like, well, it's kind of dragging its feet a little bit. We need somebody. So that's super, super helpful to have that advocacy at a senior level. So that's worked incredibly well. And yeah, it's listening, it's what are the common things. It's really difficult talking about this after Nancy Doyle because my head is just blown with all the things we should be looking and focusing on. But definitely listening, not looking at it too group, and working with yourselves, you know, trying to get that understanding of what are these general kind of changes and adjustments we can make. So yeah, being open and listening more than talking, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And if I come to you, Jen, it's on the same theme, but as you've opened up this conversation with Martin Curry, has there been any surprises to you? Has there been any, perhaps, things that you didn't anticipate?
Yes, I mean, I would say the things that as we've kind of raised our awareness, I think we observe, we notice more, you become more, actually, that's interesting, and it maybe starts, I think we're observing more, and maybe we're instigating conversations, whereas before we'd just think, oh, I don't understand that, I don't understand why that person's behaving that way, whereas now we say, actually, that's interesting, let's start a discussion, let's explore this question. This person thinks they can't do that, or this person thinks they can do that, and we're not quite seeing it marrying up. So let's understand that in a very, we try to do it with a very supportive way, to work with individuals who are maybe, we've got an example where someone has changed role, and how they've responded to that change was surprising to us. So we sat down with the individual and talked about it and how they reacted, and we were indeed surprised. But having worked through in a very open and honest and supportive environment, I think, is the key, because then you can be quite candid, you know, constructive candor, there's no sort of the psychological safety in the discussion that we're looking for a really positive outcome. We're looking to get the person to the next level, or looking to help them achieve what they're wanting to achieve. So that trust, I think, has been, if we get that in place, that is providing good outcomes and good conversations, which is the start. And we're at the start of this journey and learning. But I think, you know, having that base of psychological safety has been good and really helpful for us.
Thank you. And coming to you again, Emma, has there been any sort of early success stories for you as you've gone through this process?
We have had a few success stories, I guess. I'm not going to steal Claire's thunder here when we talk about that. But I think for us, it's the successes in people coming to talk to us and to, you know, even asking for small adjustments. Where, you know, for example, things around, we've had somebody who a very small tweak in travel times into work has made a huge difference in the level of sort of anxiety that person feels around coming into the office. We've had successes in terms of assistive software that we've been able to install for people. Particularly around our recruitment processes, we've introduced sort of behavioural-based gamification testing, which is really widening our talent pool in our around graduate recruitment. We're seeing a lot more candidates with neurodiverse conditions going further through our assessment process. I think for us, the big success is the opening up of the conversation, like Jen's saying there, and just really the myth-busting part of it. I think for us, working with Selves and Mindroom Centre really is about getting that knowledge into the business, where people really do understand what these conditions mean, and I think, and importantly, what they don't mean. And for us, I think that's what the feedback that I'm getting is that the success is around people being able to comfortably come forward and talk to their line managers about, yes, I know I've worked here for 3 or 4 years, but actually I've got dyslexia. So to me, that's hugely important. It's really positive. We've had changes, things like, and I think what you were saying in terms of people just having that awareness and thinking, oh, wait a minute, we had an example last week where someone submitted a piece of work for a job application, and it was a graphic design job, so a fantastic piece of work that had been submitted. The manager absolutely loved it, but there were quite a few errors in terms of spelling and grammar. And, you know, hands up, in years past, we'd have gone, oh, lack of attention to detail, you know, that's kind of, let's not go forward with this candidate. But actually, turning out from a conversation that this candidate has got dyslexia, and, you know, from that conversation, small changes into the types of assistive technology that she uses. Anyway, needless to say, she's in the job now. But what we really questioned in ourselves is, what are we looking for that job? You know, and actually, what we were looking for was this amazing creative mind who can do graphic design. So to me, those are things that I know that thought process wouldn't have happened before. So yeah, those are the types of, I think, successes that we're, or definitely the changes that we're seeing in terms of how managers are thinking and recruiting managers are thinking and line managers are thinking, just in terms of like what's going on here. Is there another reason why we're sort of seeing this, or, you know, what conversation can we have to support people? So yeah, just really positive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then coming on to you, Claire. So Bernice Paul, you've opened up the conversation on neuroinclusion. Has that changed anything for you or your neurodivergent colleagues in the workplace? Has there been any change for you?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, to put this in some context, I was participating in the firm's pre-partnership programme about 4 years ago, and through some initial testing that is put in place before someone goes on to that, there were definitely some sort of traits that were occurring from that, and through some further work in that programme, eventually sort of came to my attention and the people I was working with that I should perhaps have some autism screening, which the firm then arranged, and you know, when I went through the screening, that came back basically to say that I was autistic. So the firm have been really good from then on. It's been looking at things like, the usual sort of reasonable adjustments can be put in place. The pandemic then sort of intervened about 2 months after that. And of course, one thing that it was particularly useful to have an awareness of what my needs were, particularly since I was then trying to work from home with 2 very young children at the time, trying to homeschool them as well. But going back in, when schools thankfully reopened, what's been really good with the firm is that we still have a very flexible policy in terms of not just working from home, but a very much a flexible work policy in general. So one thing I find is that as offices become more and more open plan based, that I really struggle with concentration levels and a lot of people around me. So I work at my best when I work from home and I've got peace and quiet to really concentrate on the sort of very technical aspects of the work I do. So, the firm's flexible working policy has been fantastic for that. And, it's open to everyone and it's very much, how you work best, how the firm is going to get the best out of you. I think also what's also been very useful is some of the things that were pulled up in for me was that my softer skills are lacking somewhat. So, having an awareness of that has allowed me to actually then, because part of my role as a partner also involves line management of other employees, then, I can actually have that open conversation with them and say, look, sometimes I don't, I miss things, I don't quite notice that, I might say something in a certain way that I don't mean in that way, or I don't always notice that you might be not entirely happy, or there might be something going on that I miss. So look, here is, I've discovered I'm autistic, but here's what you can do to help me sort of be a better line manager as well. So it's been really beneficial because the whole process is kind of, as Emma said, opened up a much more open dialogue with people, and I feel that it allows everyone to work to the best of their ability.
Okay, thank you. Andy, if I can come to you. Are you able to tell us about some of the very practical things that have worked for you during your career?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, the kind of practical things that work are around technology. I was very fortunate to be diagnosed at a very young age, so went through education, school age, and then further education, and throughout that period got help with a lot of assistive technology in the early days, and a lot of that's been a lot more integrated into applications now and is very freely available. And those kind of tools can be really helpful. But I think a lot of that is very, very personal. And I think what we're hearing today is about making employment personal. Absolutely the things that work for people with different neurodivergent conditions will be very personal. It's something that works for me won't necessarily work for the person next to me. It was interesting listening to Rosie talk about Read and Write. That's a program I've been using for about 25 years, but a program that I stopped using for about 15, 17 years. Because I didn't think I needed it anymore. And I've started using it again over the course of the last couple of years. It's now integrated into Office 365. And it would be fair to say that a number of my colleagues have commented on the change it has made to some of my written correspondence. So it's definitely having a positive impact. But I think the most practical thing I can say to people is to be open about it. I mean, great credit to Rosie and the rest of the team for giving me a platform to be open about my condition and my experience. But having done that over the last year and a half has really fundamentally changed my relationship with my dyslexia, which I think I didn't realise how important that was in terms of being able to show up as the best version of myself, show up and be honest about myself and talk about that part of who I am just in the same way as I talk about my kids and my pets and my hobbies. But crucially to talk about it positively, to talk about the contribution that, being dyslexic has made to making me the person that I am, to making me be incredibly effective at certain aspects of my role and to have achieved what I've been able to achieve. And I think, there's There's a great campaign called Made by Dyslexia, which is something that I've embraced, and I use in a lot of correspondence, and that's been a conversation starter with so many different people in the business. Also, you're dyslexic, so what does that mean? My son's dyslexic, my daughter, I'm dyslexic. So many people have come to me and had conversations that we never would have otherwise had. And I think it's so important, and we've heard from a number of the presenters today about that positive lens that we put on the contribution of neurodiverse people. And that's great corporate speak, and it's great to talk about how we're, but actually what's so important about that is about the effect it has on the individual. I spent 35 years of my life, ashamed is probably a strong word, but certainly with a pretty negative relationship with my dyslexia. That has fundamentally changed over the last 18 months as a consequence of choosing to be more open about it, and then as a result ending up being involved in forums like this. And I think if employers can do one thing, it's to try and create a culture within organisations that encourages people to be open to start these conversations.
And actually, I've got a question here from the audience, so it's on that theme, and perhaps you'd like to take this one, Rosie. So they're saying they're trying to raise awareness of neurodiversity within their organisation, but do you have any advice on how they could encourage neurodivergent employees to feel more confident to speak out, particularly those younger employees who may not have the same level of agency as perhaps Andy?
Yeah, the agency's a big part. So one thing we've been doing for a number of years, which works, and it works in our safety sort of calendar as well as inclusion, is a suite of stories called By Colleague, For Colleague. And I remember well the first one around neurodivergence was 5 years ago. And it wasn't from an employee talking about their condition. They were talking about living with their daughter who was autistic, and that story. And that feels like a softer way in, and then all of a sudden people were coming up and wanting to talk, and I have a daughter and I have a husband, and and then this community, I can't say enough about the belonging in SSE communities, the various ones we've got. We talked about menopause earlier, Nancy was talking about that, I've got one for that, and it's incredibly helpful for all to understand more. But we don't have a shortage now of people. And Andy, again, your session last year, and we've got Linda and Kerry in the room too, hello, who also shared their story last year on an all-employee call. And it's that level of honesty, sharing, transparency, talking as an employee to another employee that really, really works. And that took 3 people, and it's had a monumental gain in the organisation for people being happy to talk about this. So thank you again. Thank you, ladies.
And just to add to what Rosie said, I don't think you can take it in isolation. It is about culture within an organisation. It's about that willingness for people to be open about all aspects of their lives. Whether it's sexuality, whether it's lifestyle choices, whatever it is. Creating a culture where people can bring their whole selves to work, and neurodivergence is just a theme within that.
Thank you. Okay, Jen, if I could come to you again. We've got a question here from the audience. So the kind of work that you're doing on neuroinclusion, do you think that that's had any sort of wider positive impact on the wider workforce, if you like?
I think it's around the question of being able to bring your whole self to work, and we've been following a program. Neuroinclusion is part of this, but we've been looking at mental health, been looking at menopause, many other areas of interest to our employees and their families. And the key bit for us is, if you bring your whole self to work, you're much more likely to perform and to contribute and to fulfill your potential and be happy and engaged and fulfilled in your job. We want our employees to be happy because that's how they will do their best work and will succeed as a company. But we want to provide a happy workplace for everyone. So we see this as one of the steps in the way along the journey of helping people be the real self, feel supported, be authentic, have trusting and open conversations. And yes, there's work to be done, because some people are coming at it from, I mean, I remember when I started out my career, the mantra was try and hide in your own image, because then you'll know what you're dealing with. And now it couldn't be further from the truth. You know, you try and hire a diverse group, people who will think differently from you, because it helps you, it makes you stronger because you've got diversity. And I think that is very true now. And so people are looking for that and embracing that positively. So I think we're at Martin Currie, we're starting on this journey to learn about neurodiversity. And there's great interest, because the thing is, everyone is touched by it in some way. Whether an employee is neurodivergent themselves, but they will know someone who is, whether it's a child or a cousin or whoever. Everyone has a story to tell about it, and how they interact with that person and the stories they have. So it brings people to life talking about this, because it is real life, and it's what we're all living with and working with and experiencing on a day-to-day basis. It's just the richness of life.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to Bernice Paul, because we have got a question about law firms. In a fast-paced law firm, do you think there's a job to do in terms of being more patient and supportive in terms of diversity? And also, it's been asked, do you have any plans to do any training with sort of frontline managers?
Yeah, so I guess there is a huge preconception about life in a large law firm. I suppose the thing is, we have a range of jobs within our firm. We're not just all lawyers. Obviously, I'm not one, Claire's. So there's a range of different jobs there. I think it is fast-paced. Lots of the roles that we have are very fast-paced. Lots of the jobs are very technical. They are very demanding. But I think I would say the culture shifted. I mean, actually, Claire's probably better to answer this than me, but the culture is certainly shifting, as I said, to be more person-centred and looking at the ways that people can do the job that suits them best. There's definitely a culture shift. So we've kind of definitely seen that over the last few years in terms of mental health. There's a very big focus in the legal profession now on mental health and working practices, and I think there is a recognition there that a lot of the ways that they've kind of operated in the past, the presenteeism, the sort of high pressure, some of it's quite unnecessary. And I think the pandemic's been a bit of a leveller in that. A lot of the practices that we've had in the past have maybe, there hasn't been a real need for them. So there's much more of a focus on looking at how we can get the best out of people to get the job done. I mean, for us, our kind of, I guess, culture we like to think is human and high performing. And there's such a relationship between those two. So recognising that as an employer, we have a really human side, and that is how we get the best out of people. I think within the sector generally, I mean, Scotland's slightly different, but particularly down south, there's a lot more, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, there's a lot more guidance around workplace culture. You can hugely be in breach if your culture's causing harm to your employees. These are things that wouldn't even have been kind of discussed in the past. So I do think there's a shift there. I think generally people, I don't know if becoming more patient is the word, but becoming more, there's a focus on being a more empathetic manager, and having more of an understanding that your employees are not, they are there to work, but everybody has a different identity. People have things going on in their lives that they don't drop at the front door, and it's about understanding that, whole self piece. So I think there's definitely been a change there. I think there's, certainly aspects of the jobs that our lawyers do that are very, very challenging. But it's about how we kind of give people the, I guess, toolkits and resources to manage the challenging parts of the jobs. And part of that is having our managers, our line managers, to be trained properly in how to have good conversations. I mean, I always say this working in HR, but having good conversations is really the crux of a lot of, the crux of a lot of it. So I think having a good relationship with your managers and having the knowledge as a manager, which is why it's so important for us to raise awareness of neurodiversity and really, as I say, a bit of myth busting around what that means, having someone in your team who has a neurodiverse condition, really understanding what that means and how it can impact that person, what the challenges might be, what the strengths of that person are, and how to play to the strengths of that person. So yes, we do training with our managers. Aileen's done training in our organisation, which line managers have attended. And actually, just going back to one of the first questions there about kind of engaging people in this, that's one of the ways that we've really got people talking. So if, having a training session, and then we'll have people talking afterwards and asking questions, and people quite freely talking about their own experiences of different conditions. And, at times where the manager's been like, oh, I didn't actually realise that you were dyslexic or dyspraxic. So these are great ways to open up conversations. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to management and just, there's definitely, I would say, been a positive shift in that in the sector over the last few years. And I think that's going to be a continuing trend.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rosie, if I can come back to you, we've got a question here from Ewan, who has asked, how do you feel that we can bring about a sort of culture shift, if you like, within a larger organisation?
So I think there's no doubt about it. It needs to be a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. I think, all the research that's out there now about diversity of thought and how much it adds to the bottom line, and we've been reviewing that for a number of years, that's not questionable now. What's questionable for leaders is how. How do I do this? How do I lead from the front? How do I become and advocate this? And so we've invested in the last year for our executive committee in raising that awareness in a safe space for them as a learning cohort, as an exec committee, on the neuroscience of inclusion and diversity, on growth mindset and on psychological safety. And they have felt safe in an environment with peers to do that. Because sometimes, and a colleague of mine often says this, somebody gets the label of leader or manager and you just expect that they know all of this, but they don't. And, it's also not, it's not about people knowing the ins and outs of every condition and every strand of diversity. It's about knowing how to be respectful, and it's about knowing when to manifest an opinion and when not. So just on the point there about bringing your whole self to work, that's great. But I think from an HR perspective as well, we need to be careful. And there needs to be a balance there as well, doesn't there, between people not falling into the trap of thinking, well, I have this opinion, it's my right to manifest it across the organisation. There are still rules and values that we all need to align to. So I think it's back to the question about culture change. Definitely listen to the employees, listen to the leaders as to what they need. And it's the small steps every day and the behavioural changes that makes a difference. It's not fast. It's not, if I was given £1 every time I was asked, what's the 5 things I can do and make a difference? And we've been at this for years, not on neurodiversity, but it's the whole inclusion agenda for several years, and it's taking time. It's taking time, but it's eating away and biting away. And also, I would add, it's identifying who your key process owners are in the business and working with them. And we've worked over the last few years so that they are taking more ownership as the process owners as to what continuous improvement looks like. And that's a shift from having a central team that advises what the continuous improvements could be. So that allows a sort of army of people to help address the challenges.
Okay. Thank you. Now, we've had a few questions on this particular theme, and if I may, Andy, I'll come to you. Have you seen, you're very open about being neurodivergent in the workplace. Have you seen any sort of pushback on the conversation on neuroinclusion? Is that something you've experienced, or perhaps younger colleagues have experienced?
I'm very conscious that I come at this from a position of white, male, senior privilege, and therefore I probably don't get the same level of resistance. But I can reflect back on my own career, and I think the challenge that you have, or I have come across in the past, is maybe comes from a place of ignorance, but it comes from a place where people want to do the right thing, but the way they go about it is actually quite destructive. So one of the things I've experienced in the past is trivialization. So it used to be quite a big thing for me to tell somebody that I was dyslexic and to do that. And often it would be in a sort of confessional context after I'd been challenged about the quality of a piece of work. And on more than one occasion, I would have line managers or superiors, when you tell them something like that, their response would be, oh, I don't read very well, or my spelling's crap too. And that sort of trivialization is really quite destructive. So that's something you've got to be careful about. I think in terms of pushback, I think we heard a little bit from Rory Bremner this morning. There's clearly a section of the media that have a certain agenda when it comes to neurodivergent conditions, and that's always been the case around these conditions. I mean, dyslexia is probably one of the most well-established neurodivergent conditions, and I know there's certainly there used to be a thing called private school dyslexia. Like you had to have a certain privilege to get a certain diagnosis, you would see a level of stigmatism attached to that diagnosis. I think it has got a lot better. And we were speaking actually just this morning about our graduate community, and there's a generational element to both a willingness to be open about these things, but also an expectation of support. I am dyslexic and I need this support. I am autistic and I need this accommodation. And I think that can only be positive in terms of transforming all of our attitudes and behaviours around this sort of stuff. So I think it still exists, and I think crucially it's incumbent upon all of us to challenge it if we see that prejudice and that pushback. But I think it's definitely getting better.
Thank you. Claire, if I can come back to you, if I may. Lived experience, those sort of stories are very powerful. But how do you think organisations can encourage employees to feel more comfortable about sharing their story?
I think, as Emma said before, having that awareness, training. We've had some training sessions with the whole firm, where we've had people, telling their stories, making people realise that it's nothing to hide. In my own case, as I said, I found out that I was autistic about a year before going for partnership, and it was a question for me of whether I disclosed that I am autistic on my partnership application. And I decided I was going to do so because I wanted to be honest about things. And I also felt it gave some context to, certain other things that went with that application. But, I was aware that there is perhaps still that stigma attached. So I think, helping people to understand, what neurodivergent conditions are and how they might affect people, but not just to the negative, like to the, to the positive as well. And I mean, I was listening to Rory Bremner's talk this morning as well, which I thought was amazing. And he was saying, the positives as well. There obviously are, there can be some negatives, but I mean, in my case, for example, I'm a tax planning lawyer. It's basically, I suppose from my point of view, the advantages are that I'm a very, very logical thinker. If someone gives me a whole set of facts with an issue, as long as they leave me alone in peace and silence to actually get to the crux of it, I will get to the crux of the problem, and I'll be able to solve it as well. So, there's this huge advantage actually to some aspects of in my case, of being autistic. So, just to allow people to be open and about who they are, and also to, have an understanding for the other employees of what advantages and disadvantages for the person can be, and how to work with them around it. And by doing that, you know, you'll get the best out of your employees.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we've talked about before. Quite often, if a neurodivergent employee discloses a neurodivergent condition in the workplace, the conversation will focus around the differences, the challenges, and is often not a balanced conversation with that person's strengths, talents, and abilities. And so it's about working with managers to ensure that a balanced conversation happens. But on that theme, if I can come to you again, Jen, how do you think we can perhaps empower managers to support sort of reasonable adjustments, and also to support their neurodivergent colleagues? Because quite often managers are on the very front line.
Yes, indeed. So managers do need a lot of support, and I think, you know, as our previous speaker was talking, they are under a lot of stress. So having a really thoughtful and enlightened HR department is critical, and, you know, that's prepared to go and have conversations and to challenge line managers sometimes, because often, you know, line managers are doing 100 things. So if you're looking to put out a new role to the market, you know, more often than not, the line manager will take the old role profile that's been used for 10 years, slightly updated, and actually, no, you have to rethink these things and encourage them to, or work with them to think about the benefits that you could be bringing to your team, the different insights, the different ways of working, rather than going down and recruiting in the same image as we've done for the last 10 years. So I think highlighting the benefits and the more rounded teams that we can create, and the different skills that we can bring in, is really important. So supporting line managers, education, showing them actually that this is a way. I mean, one of the things we talk about with our leaders is, if they want to progress, the skills that they will need to show are in leadership are emotional intelligence, understanding, compassion, and empathy for your teams, that are going to inspire loyalty and trust, and good characteristics and good team characteristics. And these are things where leaders gain by having an understanding of their team and having an understanding of the people they work with. So going through the training, whether it's not a one and done thing, it's an ongoing cultural thing. And I think you set the tone at an organizational level. We want to be an inclusive culture. This is how, from top down, from bottom up, all the way through, all those little things that happen, those interactions on a day-to-day basis, how all those line managers and leaders and employees show up, and how they see the seniors role modelling and behaving towards others, and say, actually, no, this is how our organisation turns up and show that and respects our colleagues and others. And that's the way I think that line managers will see, actually, no, times are shifting. And as we bring more people in, teams will become more diverse, and these things, it'll gather moss. And over time, and we're beginning to see this now, our teams have become more diverse, and we are more thoughtful about this and challenging. Whereas 5 years ago, I don't think we would have been having those discussions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. If I can come to you again, Emma. So we have a question here, and it's about someone who's got a specific sort of diagnosis, but how that doesn't necessarily predict an individual's sort of strengths and weaknesses. How would you work with someone to perhaps assess what might work and also avoid stereotypes?
Sorry, what?
So it's about if someone discloses within the workplace, how do you ensure that you avoid sort of using stereotypes, I think, as your starting point?
I think one thing that we have probably learned, and we're, you know, as I say, quite early days in our journey with Selves and Mindroom, is that actually it's taking that individual approach. So don't assume anything. It's about a conversation. So I have very quickly learned that because one person, you know, is applying to us or says to us they have ADHD, or the next person is going to have a completely different set of needs, a set of challenges, a set of strengths. So it's really just about treating people as individuals. And, you know, if somebody's going to, you know, come and talk to me about that, or talk to their line manager, it's like starting from ground zero every time. We do have, you know, better knowledge, we're learning every time. So every time we've kind of spoken to someone and kind of built up a profile of adjustment for someone, we're able to kind of have that in the bank, but it's not always going to work for the next person. So it's very much about, just having an individual conversation and not making assumptions. And just because we're learning, we don't know it all and we never will know it all. So I think finding out for us, knowing as much as you can, but just asking the person, and generally that person will know best themselves what's going to help support them best in the workplace and kind of reach their full potential. And if they don't, and if it's just, if they've only just been diagnosed or going through that process, then we now have the benefit of being able to help signpost people to the right places and to be working with professionals to find out what the right pathway for that person is. So I think it's very much about not like treating each person as an individual. And I think one of the first sort of training or conferences I went to, that was like my big takeaway was, if you've met one person with a neurodivergent condition, you've met one person. And so that has all that, and that is challenging for employers in a sense, because you want to have a cut solution to everything and, off you pop with your reasonable adjustments, but that's not how it works. And there's so many great resources out there, and sometimes it's just the most simple things, but it's a continuous kind of learning process. And again, I think, well, as everybody said here, it comes down to being able to have good conversations and creating a culture where someone feels comfortable having that conversation. And kind of once you've got that, you're well on your way, I think.
And I think it's very much about developing that person-centred mindset as well. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our time, but just very quickly, I'd like to start off with you, Andy. If there's organisations out there that are interested in doing something on neuroinclusion at work, what key piece of advice would you give them?
I think for me, it would really be about creating those role models within an organisation, and that's not to put people up on a pedestal, but it's to create that culture of sharing, and creating an environment through which people can come forward with their experience. That's very much what we did. Rosie's talked about the belonging to communities, and it was through one of those communities and through a post about the fact that we were going to try and do something about Neurodiversity Celebration Week that I thought, actually, do you know what? Maybe that's something I want to be part of. And I think just trying through whatever tools you have at your disposal to engage your staff, try and create those spaces where people can volunteer the information and do so in an open, honest way.
And Rosie, from your perspective, what one piece of key advice would you give to people?
I think it's about acting on the knowledge you gain about this topic. So understanding, us understanding that some people read very slowly but listen very quickly. It's about building that optionality into your processes. So for our leadership development or learning materials at the moment, we make it really easy. Do you want to watch something? Do you want to read something? And what's the third one, Cara? Listen. So there's listen, watch and read. And it's baking that kind of optionality into the processes you've got that doesn't mean somebody has to come and ask for it.
Yeah. So it's that kind of moving much more towards sort of universal design, inclusive practice. Yeah. Claire, do you have any pieces of advice for any organisations that are looking to do some work in this space?
I think just particularly for those at the top, the line managers, for them to have an understanding, particularly in the legal profession, COVID and lockdown has helped us move away a lot from very rigid procedures, but in the past it's been very much, line managers wanting everyone sitting around them, dragging people into meetings to have, their blue sky thinking, etc. I think so an understanding that, everyone works in a different way and you'll get the best out of everyone by allowing them to work in that way. So really, flexibility. We talk about, the need for employees to be adaptable. I think it's more the need for you know, for the employers to be adaptable
Yeah.
if they want to get the best out of everyone.
Yeah, yeah. And generally what you find is what's good for neurodivergent employees is good for everyone. Just in the last minute, Emma, do you have one piece of advice?
I mean, it would just be similar. I think it's that point around taking that person-centred approach and encouraging those skills in managers, the, you know, empathetic, good listener, and giving people the tools and resources to be better colleagues, just, you know, helping people to feel supported, and that's whether it's parents or carers or, you know, individuals themselves. So just trying to give people as much kind of education and knowledge and have that flexibility as an employer, I think is really important.
Thank you. And then I'm going to give you the last word, Jen. Any pieces of advice from you?
Quite simply, I would say creating alignment between employee and employer and having a culture of trust and integrity. So the employee feels fulfilled, the employer is fulfilled because the employees are working well, and that's what we should try and aim for through a culture of trust and integrity.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to the panellists. That's us at the end of the session. And thank you to the audience for spending your time with us this afternoon, and also for some of your fascinating questions. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to get through them all, but hopefully I can follow this up as we move forward. So thank you, everyone.